Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Closing the Loop, How Oil Management Boosts Profits, Safety, and Sustainability. We're excited you could join us for today's session. My name is Pamela Deloach, and I'll be moderating today's event. Today, we're going to dive into how cooking oil management, usually one of the biggest headaches for restaurants, presents an opportunity for operators to save costs, improve safety, and contribute to more sustainable operations. A panel of industry experts will discuss how the traditional way of manual cooking oil handling is inefficient and costs restaurants time and money, and the challenges this necessary task presents to crew safety. They will also explore how a closed loop oil management solution, which automates delivery, filtering, monitoring, and recycling, helps reluctant managers and owners save costs, reduce risk, and maximize sustainability, both environmentally and operationally. Now, before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note that the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slide button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. And please know we do capture all questions. Now, we are thrilled to be joined by our speakers, Ron Cardwell, Director of Commodity Strategy, Restaurant Technologies, and Dylan Bolden, Director of Product Development, Restaurant Technologies. Now, to start, I'd like to ask each of you to provide a quick introduction of you and your work. Ron, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having us here. This is a lot of fun. I enjoy talking about vegetable oils in particular, and that kind of gives you a big preview into what my background is. So for the past 25 years, I've spent my entire life in the vegetable oil sector. So I spent a good 20 years just dealing with food oils, particularly in the North American market, how it goes into food manufacturing and into the food service industry, as well as along with that, taking vegetable oils into the renewable fuels production sector. So it's the two demand sides of vegetable oils in the US and globally, actually. I've been kind of in the midst of, and my whole life revolves around vegetable oils, and I'm one of those weird guys that just loves it. And so I'm so happy to get a chance to talk to everybody about it.
Great. Dylan, please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, to echo Ron's comments, very excited to be here, Pamela. Dylan Bolden. My career in food service started about 20 years ago. I've kind of worked a couple of different jobs in the food service industry and retail segments, as well as casual dining. Mostly been in the FP&A segment to help companies and organizations boost revenues, maximize bottom lines. And with Restaurant Technologies, I currently oversee our product development. So that's designed around the solutions and strategies we present to the food service industry to go to market and help them better manage their business.
Great. Now let's get right to it. To kick us off, I'd love to discuss how rising costs and an uncertain economy challenge restaurant managers and owners who are already faced with very slim profit margins. Why is it important for restaurant operations to gain efficiencies? Let's begin with Dylan.
Yeah, great question to start off. I won't walk you through an entire P&L, but that's really what we're kind of focused here on. And there's a few key things to call out there. First and foremost, restaurants are trying to make money. You start ultimately at the revenue side of things. So a few different levers you have there. What you're offering in terms of your menu offerings to customers, the price controls you have, promotional items, LTOs, and anything you can do to market your restaurant or food service organization to get more people in the door. The next kind of layer we talk about predominantly is prime costs. So that's the cost of those food items, everything coming in the door, and ultimately the labor you have to manage that. And at the end of the day, you put those things together, and that's where you're going to get profit derived from. The biggest area of opportunity that we help operators focus in on is almost that invisible labor section that we call it. It's those tasks that we all do day in and day out that really isn't derived as like a KPI. It may be something that's a little mundane that is just kind of a time suck. And that's really where oil management fits into that category, is maximizing those efficiencies where people are spending their time, delivering the highest quality of food, and ensuring that there's a safe environment. You put those three things together, and ultimately that's where operators start to see improvements in their profit margins, their bottom line, their guest experience, as well as their employee experience.
Ron, what are your thoughts?
Great. Dylan wrapped things up really well. I suppose if you look to the other side of things, which is where I am, and talk about just the commodity, the food cost side of things, that's one of those items it's hard to control. You can always look at different vendors and try to compare what does one vendor charge me versus another. But general trend lines of food costs will go the same direction no matter who the vendor is. So it's important to be able to control what you can control, which is how you handle those costs. Vegetable oil and cooking oil is one of those. You may be able to find separate vendors who have a penny or two difference between prices and think you're saving money. But what you can control as an operator is how you use that oil. You can control how quickly you turn it over and how the quality of it affects your food, so your customers will pay the most for it and you'll reap the most value. So there's lots of costs that come into control, or rather that come into the discussion, where while you may not have control of those costs, there are definitely ways to control how you handle those ingredients so you can maximize the value of those. And that's where we come in.
That's great. Well, that brings me to my next question. What is the traditional way to manage used cooking oil and disposal? And how do you know the excuse me, the oil has degraded and should be disposed? And where is it disposed?
Yeah, that's a multi-layered question. It has lots of different answers. We'll start with the basics. The traditional way to get rid of used cooking oil, there's the worst way, which is trying to pour it down a drain, right? Nobody needs that. I think we all can agree. You don't want to just throw your oil away. It's bad for the environment, bad for your pipes, those sort of things. So restaurants are always really good about properly disposing of used cooking oil. And traditionally, it's been essentially a dumpster in the back, a collection receptacle where probably the lowest ranking employee on the board has to empty the fryer into some sort of bucket and haul it across the kitchen and maybe outside, rain or snow or whatever weather, and dump it into a container. And once it's in that container, everybody forgets about it, but it still stays there. Smells, you get rodents, you get all kinds of other things besides oil going into those collection containers. But that's traditionally been the way. And you hope that there's a collector that will come by and empty it for you. You hope. Sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't, right? But that's always been the traditional way, is let's just get the oil out of our kitchen and get it somewhere else where we don't have to worry about it. And I think we can all appreciate not worrying about it. So what we're doing now is in our system, we collect that oil for you. You never have to touch it. And it does go away and you can forget about it. But what happens reliably is you don't have to haul it across the kitchen. You don't open yourselves up to injuries, slips and falls, or just having somebody who has to do the worst job in the kitchen emptying that oil, right? So it's about us taking control of that, really the worst job in the kitchen, and taking that used cooking oil and getting over it. And then we do pick it up on a regular basis because we're delivering your oil at the same time. So we're consistently showing up. We really can give you peace of mind while you don't have to think about that used cooking oil anymore.
Dylan, did you have any other thoughts on this?
Yeah. Look, I've lived the life personally. It's been a long time, but Ron's kind of correct on that aspect of it's a task that not everybody wants to handle. And we really focused in on the disposal side of things. And, working in a kitchen environment myself in later teenage years, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to dispose of it. It's a hard to do job. And what I didn't understand at the time, and not knowing, flash forward 20 years, I'd be working for a company that focuses in on oil management, is that what I was doing is I was suffering the guest experience. If you don't regularly maintain that oil, dispose it on a frequent basis, go through filtration practices, the food that's outputted from that, it suffers. And somebody dines on that and their experience isn't great, they don't come back. They go to a restaurant that prioritizes that experience. And I think it's important to kind of double click on how we define what oil management is. For restaurant technologies, we really pride ourselves in automating the entire process around it. It's getting rid of plastic containers that classically are the way you put oil in the fryer with a tank-based, pump-based system. The same aspect is true on disposing the oil, but it's also really focusing in on the quality of that oil, coaching operators and training them and providing equipment around filtration of oil to ensure that, to Ron's earlier point, you control that aspect of what you've already purchased and you maximize the life of that while delivering a higher quality food, which delivers a higher quality experience for your guests. And that's what really helps not only impact the bottom line, but those repeat visits, that same store sale increase when you get people to come back time and time again because you make the best fries in your neighborhood, in your county, in your state, and you can pride yourself on really diving into what goes into that process.
Right, right. I'm fascinated by your conversation about, the oil disposal, and it sounds like such a messy and potentially dangerous job. What are some of the other potential issues that might arise from manual oil disposal? And Dylan, sounds like you've got that firsthand experience with this. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the obvious ones is just the safety for employees. If you're doing some traditional methods, there's a lot of manual involvement from picking up heavy weighted things, which can lead to strains. Slips can occur if there's any kind of spillage, if you're using open air containers. It may not be the person actually carrying it, but someone passing through that line, ultimately not knowing that process isn't occurring. And that really impacts not only the employee itself, but a ripple effect. If you lose somebody who's working in the kitchen, you got to stop the line. Ultimately, you got to make sure they're taken care of. There could be some OSHA involvement, and ultimately that disrupts the entire operation of the kitchen in the back of the house. There's other things too to focus in on. One big area is kind of the property itself. If you're leasing a space, you have one of those outdoor receptacles. That's something to where there can be spills. Ron touched on it earlier. If that goes into a open sewer area, there's environmental impacts on that side, as well as the kind of, we call it nose pollution of, it's hot outside in the summer. You can kind of get the smell emitted from those things. That's going to impact guest experience as well. And some people may drive past that area and say, that's not somewhere where I want to sit on the patio. I want to go somewhere else that has a better environment for me.
Right. Ron, any other thoughts to add?
No, I think the topic that comes to my mind more prevalently is just the safety of handling the oil, and Dylan's talked about it. It's you can't really empty that fryer until the oil's cool. So what are you doing? You have to wait until it's at a cool. What if you're in the middle of a restaurant service and your oil quality is horrible and you have to change it out? Then you're talking about having to handle a hot oil. If you spill it, it's gonna burn. Employee injuries are just too numerous to list when you're talking about handling that hot oil. So it's really the safety that I bear in mind, which is if you don't have to handle it and you can still dispose of it when you need to, that matters. If you're waiting until the kitchen is closed to change your oil, you could be turning out food that's horrible all day long. And you don't want to risk the safety of your employees when you do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's also interesting and a little frightening. So we've talked about the many pitfalls of handling and disposing used cooking oil in the traditional manner. You gave us a little appetizer, a little teaser before about what you do, but let's talk about how oil management systems help to overcome most of those challenges, starting with cost savings. And Dylan, could you start us off here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few different ways to improve oil management. I'll kind of talk from the perspective of RTI's kind of full suite of product offerings. We look at the very early stages of cost savings in terms of lowering that oil cost itself. And what we really educate operators on is ultimately using oil management practices or SOPs that are designed to prolong the oil that you're receiving. So you're purchasing it already. What you're ultimately trying to do is make sure that you're filtering, using any kind of additives to prolong that deliver higher quality food, and thus that will directly impact the labor side of things as well. Prolonging oil life leads to less involvement on the labor side of things. So when you're changing out the oil, if you're doing it less frequently because you're focused on oil management practices, that gives you a better improvement on both those prime cost areas of not only the food purchasing side, but the labor side of things. Where RTI comes in to kind of expedite that is the speed and efficiency portion of it. Is we offer a tank-based system that routes directly to the fryer. So with a push of a button, you basically can fill up your fryer. So classically, instead of tracking down a jug of oil, pulling it from inventory, cataloging that, and then filling the fryer, you can do that on a tank-based system as well as on the disposed side of things. One area that we haven't talked about yet is really the data management or the audit side of things. So with everything that we do, instead of using classic inventory management practices of you pull something off the shelf, you use it, you dispose of it, it's a lot of manual tracking. We're actually using pump-based technology to track how much oil is going into your fryer. And that's where operators can really manage, hey, what's my unit volume, what's my fried food menu sales, and couple that with your oil management to ensure that you're putting disciplines in place that ultimately match your sales with your usage and gives you that control element back.
Great. That's great, Ron. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add, Ron?
Yeah, I think one of the places we'd like to start with all of our customers is just evaluating the oil you're using, which is a source we can provide. A lot of kitchens just use an oil. Sometimes they're using oil because that's just what their predecessor used, or that's just what was always in place. And you can incur a lot of costs if you're not using the right oil. Now, I'm not one to second guess any chef on their choice of an oil for their menu. You know what you want your food to taste like. But if you haven't evaluated it, we can first make sure you're using the right oil for your usage. If you're not, you could be going through it way faster than you need to. You may be using something that it just doesn't stand up to the harshness that you have. You may be using an oil that's way more than you need, right? Which means you're just spending more on the oil than you need to. So aside from us just making sure you're using the oil properly, we like to talk to restaurants and say, look, let's talk about the oil you are using, and let's make sure you're using the right one. We try to help you get all the oil correctly that you need. And honestly, we carry a lot of different varieties, if you will. So we're not partial to one or the other. We want to make sure it's right for you. And then we have a vast network of restaurants that we handle. So we have very big buying power with oil. So we can also help you on that purchase side to make sure you're getting the most competitive price for whatever oil it is that you're using. So even if you think just one for one, you can't save cost on the oil, we think we can if we get you the right oil and you let us help you with just buying power, good market information, and buying it correctly.
Great. Dylan, do you have thoughts on the sustainable workforce?
Yeah, I think that's one area. We talked a little bit about it earlier in terms of lowering that risk score, that risk factor in adopting safer practices. But there's some additional benefits on there. I think one thing classically the food service industry gets noted for is a high turnover rate. When you're adopting, and not just oil management practices, but broader practices in the back of house that create a safer environment for folks that they can confidently know, hey, I can go to work, I can do what I need to do, and I can go home and make sure I come back at the end of the day. That boosts a retention factor that's harder to quantify, but ultimately shows up when you have tenure in your workforce that love doing what they're doing. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if an employee has an option to say, hey, I can go work somewhere that doesn't devote time, systems, improvements to that kind of operational efficiency or investments back into the employee, and you get to choose between restaurants that do invest in that side of things, I think that gives you a high degree of a sustainable workforce to retain those folks. That's something that we even adopt internally for, we call our internal customers, but people who work operationally for restaurant technologies is, look, we want to make sure we create a safe environment. Don't put you to any situation that creates something that's an element of risk that you won't be able to go home safely at the end of the day. So that's something that we pride ourselves not only internally, but want to make sure we educate our customers on as well. Because look, there's a lot of money tied up in the insurance world. Restaurants have to carry a certain degree of coverage. It's a lot of expense on their bottom line in terms of premiums to make sure they're qualified for that. But brokers and underwriters, they love to see operators go down the path of choosing risk adverse practices and investing in equipment and technologies that kind of promote those environments. And they typically respond in terms of reducing premium credits. And that gives savings to operators that they didn't see before. Those are the ancillary benefits that, you know, everyone can receive by adopting safer practices.
Good point. What about environmental sustainability?
Well, that's my favorite topic. So Dylan touched on it a bit earlier when we're talking about just the oil handlings that we do. You know, most restaurants are using jugs in a box. In the industry, we call them jibs, and that's a standard way to use to get your oil. And what we've done is we've eliminated just all the waste that comes along with those. There's a cardboard box and a plastic jug in every one of those containers. And they contribute to huge amounts of landfill waste across the country. If you think about a restaurant that uses, let's just say 350 pounds of oil in a week, that's 10 of those boxes and jugs every week that they're going through. I mean, the number that comes through in a year is just enormous. It's just waste. So to be able to eliminate that type of waste in the system is, you can't put any value on that. There is a value, there's a carbon value to it, but it's measurable, right? So that's the environmental impact that we do on the front end. On the back end, what we're doing is just even better. All that wasted oil that we go through a really good process of capturing every bit, we put directly into renewable fuel production. So anything that's not getting put out of the fryer into food is going to go into making renewable diesel and biodiesel, which runs the truck deliveries, which runs the country on our diesel fuels. So every restaurant that uses our system can feel comfortable in knowing not only are you going to eliminate landfill waste on the front side, but on the back side, you're going to clean up the air, you're going to clean up the fuel system, because you're going to be contributing to the renewable fuel environment as well, too.
That is impressive. I was actually going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about the oil recycling process.
Yeah, the process it's grown. Obviously, in the past 15 years or so, we've seen that industry grow pretty dramatically. And I think nobody's so unaware of it that they haven't heard of food versus fuel debate. And vegetable oil does go directly into fuel production, but it's never the food oil that goes in. So the most sustainable production you can get is waste oil. And the waste from the restaurants is the number one sought after ingredient, if we will, feedstock that goes into renewable fuels. So it's really just a manufacturing process that cleans that waste oil up, just kind of removes impurities, if you will, and puts it into a production process that turns it into fuel. Not very complicated. It's kind of like, it's easy to do, but it's really hard to do well. But what matters is the feedstock going in. Our used cooking oil collection, because it is this closed loop system, is just one of the cleanest and easiest to handle of feedstocks for renewable fuel producers. And they really clamor after our supply because there's nothing else in it besides the oil. It goes through filtration when we pick it up and when we get it to them. But it means they can make more fuel easier and more cost effective with it. But the process itself is well-heeled. It's ingrained into the U.S. fuel system, and the used cooking oil production, or I should say supply, is key to that system.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Now I'd like to shift to some questions from our audience today. So let's jump right in. Here's the first one. Is there a specific type of oil we have to use in order to use this closed loop oil management system? If either of you would like to take on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. The short answer is no. So it's we use this term a lot, and we mean it. We're oil agnostic. If it can work in our system, and there's enough demand for it, then we can get it for you and put it into use. Right? It just has it's just a matter of making sure that it flows through our system. But we have a pretty dynamic set of engineers who can figure things out pretty well. There are some restrictions for sure. Solid oils, things like that can be difficult to handle. But we have, and Dylan will know this number better than I, we have dozens of varieties of oils throughout all of our depots. So we're not just, locked into one type at all.
Yeah, Ron kind of touched on it earlier. We take the stance of being oil agnostic. Ultimately, we want to deliver at the end of the day what a location, an operator, or even a multi-unit brand has elected that is the best for their menu type, what they're ultimately producing at the end of the day. And yeah, Ron's correct. We offer a large variety of oil types today. We're very fortunate being a domestic United States national coverage company. There's a lot of different variety of oil types in the country, and that's kind of one of the biggest things in terms of food processing that we have widely available. So yeah, we want to really understand from an operator standpoint what fits their menu type best and offer a solution that delivers that.
Great. Okay. Next question. You all mentioned earlier that the system monitors oil usage. Can you talk more about these features and the data the system gathers?
Yeah, I can take that one. Ultimately, what we're looking at is a couple of different things. First and foremost is the oil inputs that are going into the fryer. So the fresh oil that you're adding, that's the biggest thing that operators kind of focus in on in terms of managing costs is how much oil am I using, how much is going in there, and making sure I understand the price impact that it takes to fill a fryer and how that directly correlates to the volume or the fried food that you're ultimately serving to your guests and what that revenue reflects against. The next kind of factor we look at is filtration monitoring. So we have a product called FFM, Fryer Filtration Monitoring, that ultimately says, hey, I think my employees are filtering the oil and prolonging it and doing everything that you recommended in Total Oil Management Protocol, but how do I prove it? Well, that's what this system ultimately does. It either hooks up directly to the fryer itself or a roll-up filtration unit that we provide that ultimately gets those readings to ensure that you know what's going into the fryer, but how long, how often are you actually doing those total oil management filtration practices to prolong that oil? And then the last side of the equation is ultimately how frequently someone is disposing of it. That's a big thing to kind of catch those, book in those data points to say, we know when the oil is going in, we know that you're holding filtration practices, and we know how frequently you're disposing it. So that gives an operator kind of total control around their fried food program.
Great. All right, one more. Is there a recommended weekly, monthly oil usage where the ROI makes sense for a restaurant to take advantage of the system?
Yeah, I say no. Ultimately, it's what are the core pillars of what you're trying to achieve, and that's what our sales teams across the country do a really good job of, is consulting with operators and really trying to determine, hey, what matters the most to you. RTI is fortunate that we really offer our product suite all across the segments, whether that be hospitality, QSR, casual dining, fine dining, food service, college universities. Really, there's different values to what we bring to the table. And we've talked a lot about that today in terms of efficiency, sustainability, safety, cost management. All of those things are what businesses are trying to impact at the end of the day. And really, if you have something that you can deliver a quality product to your guest and do some good in the world, like Ron talked about, recycling the used cooking oil and keeping your employees' safety, I think that's where we align with folks who use us. But, I'm not going to lie, if it's a high volume fried chicken place that's 95% of the menu is fried food, you're going to see a lot more benefits, because that's a heavy burden. That's a heavy task, especially if oil is a top 3 P&L line item. If you lose less oil, but ultimately you're trying to create a safer environment for your workforce or do a little bit of good from your ESG scorecard standpoint, we also fit that environment.
Great.
Yeah, I'll add to that, say there's tangible and intangible benefits. And the tangible ones are the ones you can look at a spreadsheet and kind of determine, hey, this volume at this price makes sense. And there's a lot of those. And the more volume you use, yes, you're going to see greater. But you can't put a value on employee safety and environmental stewardship, which is any restaurant of any size can benefit from there. And depending on how you value that, it can make a difference for every restaurant.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, that is all the time we have today. I'd like to thank our speakers, Ron and Dylan, for a great discussion. And we appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us today as well. We hope to see you again. Have a good one.